Hello and welcome. So we've been talking about demand curves and how in general prices go up, people buy less of something, prices go down, people buy more of it. That's the law of demand, and that's why when we draw a demand curve, it's sloping down. What we've started talking about more is how different things can actually shift that demand curve. So if we're talking about just the prices moving for whatever reason, that's a move along the demand curve. But a lot of other things, the demand curve is holding everything else constant, which we call ceteris paribus. So a lot of things could change that we may care about, and that's actually going to cause shifts in the demand curve. So for a simple example, if incomes go up, people tend to want to buy more as their budget straight pushes out. So demand curves tend to shift out. At any given price, people want to buy more of stuff. Now that's usually true. That's true for what we call normal goods. So in front of me I've got a granola bar, I've got a little K-cup coffee pod, I've got brewed coffee, and I've got some tea. All of these would generally be considered normal goods. People earn more money, they tend to spend more on this sort of thing. And that's true of most products in our economy. There are some things that we call inferior goods, and those are things that when people earn more money, their income goes up, it actually causes the demand curve for those things to shift in. So those are things that we generally think of as often lower quality substitutes. Maybe a generic type of product that could instead be replaced with a higher quality brand name product. The generic product may well be an inferior good. But so there's an example of something that shifts demand curve, income changes. We talked about how taste and preferences are a big driver in what shifts the demand curve. So right now, believe it or not, there are a lot of people wanting to buy relatively cheap laptops. I'm laughing because it's not surprising to me. We had to search around a little bit to buy some for my two oldest kids because their school highly encourages them to have their own device, and tablets work for some of the stuff but not everything. It's really helpful for them to have a keyboard. So we don't want to buy them a fancy laptop, but a lower cost Chromebook is the sort of thing we're looking for. Well, it turns out with thousands and probably even millions of students in the US having virtual school right now, there's a whole lot of people looking for those sort of Chromebook, fairly low cost sort of laptop options. So because of pandemic schooling situation, people's preference for a certain type of device has changed. The demand curve has shifted way out for something like Chromebooks, especially lower end of the price range Chromebooks. So taste and preferences can change kind of for a lot of different reasons. One reason we've alluded to is because we look at a specific market, say the market for lower price range Chromebooks, but that market is actually connected to other markets, right? So people don't use that product in a vacuum. They are using it in conjunction with other things, such as schooling. So most products that we use are used in conjunction with other products in different ways. So changes in taste and preference for a given product may change partially because of the way it's related to other markets. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how different things may be connected to each other. So let's talk about coffee. So I regret, normally if we were meeting in person under normal circumstances, I would have brought in some coffee for everyone. And I'll tell you what I would have brought in. I would have brought in basically 3 of those boxes of hot drink from a place like Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, or a place that you can get a catering sized container of drink. And I would have a regular coffee, I would have a dark brew coffee, and I would have a thing of tea. So why would I bring that in? Well, it's nice to be able to offer you guys something. It's nice to share a drink, and if you're able, maybe go make yourself a drink right now. I've got a couple ones in front of me. Why would I do this? Well, it can help us think about the relationship between some of these different products. So if, for example, I offer you a cup of the regular brewed coffee for free, or I ask for $1 if you want a cup of the dark roast coffee, how many people would choose the dark roast coffee? Probably not very many. If there's free regular coffee right there, the dark roast costs $1, you may prefer dark roast coffee, but you're still probably not going to take an extra $1 to buy a cup of that. Some people would, and that's fine. But a lot of people wouldn't. A lot of people would just take the regular cup of coffee if it's free. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us a little something about the relationship between those two products and those two markets. So a regular roast coffee and a dark roast coffee, those are substitute goods. Those are goods that you could have one or you could have the other. You may prefer one or the other. You may be willing to pay more money for one or the other. But there's a relationship between the two, and it's the relationship that you're essentially choosing between the two of them. So, if you go into Starbucks, you choose which kind of coffee drink you feel like that day. You're looking at different substitute goods and you're picking from among them. Now, it could be that there's the coffee and the tea, and I offer the same sort of deal. I say the tea is free, or you can buy a cup of coffee for $1. Now, some people may lean toward the tea. Some people may prefer tea straight up, and that's great. They'll obviously pick the tea if that's free. There's some people who may prefer coffee, but they'll still pick the tea if the tea is free, right? And then there are other people who say, I'll pay the $1 for the cup of coffee. I prefer coffee, tea is nice, but it just isn't the same, and I need the coffee right now. So, depending on who you are and what mood you're in, coffee and tea might be substitutes. You could be picking which of those you feel more like at the moment. I'm going to have a sip of the tea right now. It's good stuff. But for me, it's not the same as coffee. Let's talk more about the coffee. Now, what about these two things? So I've got this K-Cup. It's a Peet's. It's good stuff. And I've got this, which is basically the same thing, except it's been brewed, combined with water, heated up, and put into a cup. Now, how do I think about these two things? Well, it kind of depends on what situation I'm in, right? If I'm here, sitting in the comfort of my home, and there happens to be a K-Cup brewer, then I may be pretty much indifferent between these two options. It would basically depend, do I want to drink the coffee right now, in which case I like this one, or might I want the coffee a little bit later, maybe after lunch? In that case, I'd probably take this one, right? It'll be fresh if I brew it right after lunch, so this might actually be better for me. Now, if you ask me when I'm in my car on my commute to work, I might really want a coffee, in which case this would get me really excited. What about this one? It's pretty worthless to me in the car, right? In fact, under normal situations, there's a K-Cup brewer in the economics department office. So if you offered it to me while I was on my commute to work, I would say, well, I can't have it right now. I would definitely prefer a brewed cup already. But it's still nice to have, because once I get to work, I can brew it. Given COVID-19 situation, we try to cut back on communal sort of things like the K-Cup brewer, so it has been stashed and it's under lock and key, I'm sure, somewhere. So right now, if you offered it to me on my commute to work, I would say, well, thanks, I guess, but, it doesn't really do much for me, because I can't drink it then. I can't drink it when I get to work. It would be after I get home from work that I could first do something with it. So, two goods might well be substitutes, like a K-Cup and a brewed cup of coffee, depending on the situation. If I'm at home, yes. If I'm on my way to work, no, not at all. There's a huge difference. So, context really matters if we're looking at things like goods that are complements and substitutes. And the way we'll see that, and you'll see it in the homework, and you'll see it on the first midterm, is I'll ask you about how a change in something will affect something else. And so, well, let's think about this guy. I've got a granola bar here. How might we think about a granola bar together with a cup of coffee? So, are these goods going to be substitutes or complements? So we haven't talked a lot about complements. Complements are things that go really well together. They complement each other. So in my mind, a granola bar and a cup of coffee, those are pretty good complements. They pair well. One is something that can satisfy the hunger. The other one gives me the caffeine I'm looking for. They taste nice eating them together. I mean, there's a reason that Starbucks sells snacky little sort of food, right? And they've got baked goods, but they've also even got packaged granola bars and stuff like this. It's because coffee is a nice complement with a lot of these little foods. Coffee cake. So these would be complement goods. Depending on the circumstances and your taste and preferences, the tea and the coffee might be substitutes, or these two forms of coffee might be substitutes. But again, the context really matters. So since that's true, I try to be pretty careful when I'm asking you a question. I try to make it, I either give you enough context or I try to make it a straightforward enough example that there's hopefully not a lot of ambiguity. But so what I'll be asking is something like this. If granola bars are on sale, there's buy one, get one free, what does that do to your demand curve for coffee? So how would we think about that? Well, we think, okay, are these things that are substitutes or complements? These are complements. They go well together, right? So if there's a sale on granola bars, that means I'm going to be buying more granola bars, according to our law of demand, right? It has its own demand curve that we could draw, and lowering the price is going to increase the quantity we buy of granola bars. So if granola bars are on sale, I'm going to buy more of them. So the question is, what does that do to my demand curve for coffee? Well, in a situation like this, where they're complement goods, if I have more granola bars, it means I'm actually going to want a little bit more coffee, right? Since these things pair so well together. So if granola bars are on sale, the price of granola bars goes down, what does it do to my demand curve for coffee? It shifts the demand curve out. At any given price, I want to buy a little bit more coffee because it pairs so well with this other thing that I know I'm going to have more of. So in an extreme example, you can think about like someone gives you a whole bunch of something. What is that going to do to your demand curve for another good? So let's talk about the coffee and the tea. If someone gives you a lifetime supply of Lipton's green tea, what is that going to do to your demand for coffee? Well, if the goods were complements, if they paired really well together, then giving you a lifetime supply of one would mean you want more of the other, and it would shift it out. Coffee and tea are probably, for most people, more like substitutes, right? You're picking which one you feel like at the moment. It's not that you're going to get both and have them together. These are more things that you're thinking about substituting for one another. Well, that means if you're given a lifetime supply of Lipton green tea, you're probably not going to be buying quite as much coffee because you know you have all this tea already. So your demand curve for coffee is going to actually shift in. At any given price, you're going to be buying less coffee. So that's how we think about complement and substitute goods. And I often think of that extreme example. What if someone gave you a whole bunch of one of these things, tea or granola bars? What would that do to your demand curve for coffee? And if they're substitutes, you give me a whole bunch of tea, my demand curve for coffee is going to shift in. If you give me a whole bunch of granola bars, my demand curve for coffee is going to shift out. And that's because tea and coffee are substitutes, granola bars and coffee are complements. Okay? So that's one aspect of the taste and preferences that can shift a demand curve. We talked about it a little bit, and we talked about how markets are connected, but hopefully this helps make it a little more real and prepares you for on the homework when I ask you, what do we expect a demand curve to do when the price of another good changes? Well, we think about whether it's a complement or a substitute and go from there. All right? Thanks.